myself, only one of us was born in the hospital, and that was Toots, because they were living on the farm at that time, and Toots needed the facilities of the hospital. So she was the only one that made it into modern technology. I was born across the street from Cane's Ice Cream Store the very day that it opened. So that explains a lot, possibly. It was a great place. Of my 7 brothers and sisters, the oldest, I hope this comes out, the oldest was my sister Eleanor. The next oldest was my sister Genevieve. Then my brother Jerry. My sister Bernice. My brother Joe. My sister Toots, or Louise. And of course myself. Mom and Dad, as the picture shows, were very proud of their 7 children. And they were very religious people. Dad was a religious man, very much of a family man, a state worker. He'd been a Spanish American and American World War I veteran. He never quite made it to combat in either war, which is one of his lifelong regrets. But he worked for the state for many years, eventually retiring with a pension from the state, which was probably pretty lucky, since Adlai Stevenson made sure he got his last job working for the state, Adlai being actually of the opposite party Pop had worked for all of his life. My dad was of French ancestry. His parents had come from Canada, settling for a while at Three Rivers, Michigan, and then moving on down to Chicago, where Dad was born, and then later down to Springfield. Mom was German, and her father had come from Trier and Mosel in Germany, and her mother's father and mother had come from Germany also. Her mother was Pauline Neff, and she married Pauline, a young widow woman, Pauline Geyer, and she married Matt Neff, who came from Trier. And my mother ensued from that. She had 2 half-sisters from my grandmother's previous marriage, Pauline and Mary. But Mom was the one of 2 children born to Matt and Pauline Neff, though the other child, her sister, died in infancy. Lockjaw. Dad was always very interested in politics, not as running in politics, but in supporting people who did. And he worked very actively in politics most of his life. As for schools, I was very fortunate. By the time I was ready to go to school, we had moved from Glenwood to the corner of College and Edwards, right across the street from Gottschalk's store, right to the east of it, which is still there now as Boone's Saloon. And when we moved about 2 blocks over to 317 West Jackson when I was 4. And that's where I spent most of my childhood and just about all of my grade school days. I attended St. Agnes School and graduated from that in about 44, and then graduated from Springfield High School in 1949. Years later, I got a Bachelor of Arts degree from Sangamon State University, which is now known as University of Illinois Springfield. I, at a very early age, was interested in the military service, and while I was still in high school, actually I had a choice between going into the National Guard and getting on the football team. And my interests even then were very largely with the military. So I joined the Guard in 1948 while I was still a junior in high school, which as far as the coach of our football team went, just put me out because I was because of going to summer camp. I was 17 when I joined the Guard, and that was May 1st, or May 2nd, 1948. Well, as I say, I was a junior in high school. I served for about approximately a year and a half in the National Guard, and then joined the regular Army. I liked it. And so I thought I'd try my hand at the regular Army part of it. And I got in there and took my basic training out at Fort Riley, Kansas, or a part of it called Camp Funston. And fortunately, my sister, of course, is out there near at Junction City, right near Fort Riley, so I got to see her a little bit while I was in basic. And her husband, being a strong Knight of Columbus, got me sworn into the Knights of Columbus while I was in basic training. So I accomplished a couple things there. And I maintained that until I got out of, a couple years after I got out of the Army, and then I dropped my affiliation with the Knights of Columbus. It just sort of died away. After basic training at Fort Riley, Kansas, I came home for a short leave and then was assigned to Fort Carson, Colorado. And I joined, it was actually mountain troops there. I joined the I can't even think of the name of the regimental combat team that it was now. But at any rate, it was a lot of fun. It was, we drove tanks during the summer and we were ski troops in the winter. So I spent the winter of 1953 or 52. Oh boy, I'm way ahead. I spent the winter of 1950 actually up in the mountains in Colorado. And then came down when the Korean War broke out. Why, I was, I volunteered as far as it goes, and they took my volunteering very happily and shipped me off to Korea, Mach Schnell. So they flew me over, in fact. They were trying to build up the Army at that time to resist the North Korean invasion. And they did. They managed to do it. Now, I joined, they put me into the 7th Division, which was forming up at that time in near Camp Drake in Tokyo. And we went ashore at Incheon with MacArthur's famous Incheon invasion there. And so I went through the Korean thing and came out. I was very fortunate. I was lightly wounded. I had my ears thoroughly clobbered, and that was about the size of it. I came home after that and was shipped to the 1st Army area at Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland. I spent about a year, a little over a year there, and was until my discharge.
Well, tell us, Bernie, what did you do after you got home?
Okay, after I got home, having been discharged about the 10th of October in 1952, why, I went to work at Allis-Chalmers for about a year. And a big layoff came up there. And this was sitting around and drawing unemployment was not my idea of much living. So I decided I'd go out and see some of the old U.S. and some of the cities. So out of all the cities in the U.S., I picked New York as possibly the most interesting. It came down to New York and New Orleans. I finally took New York. And as a reason to go there, I decided I had to do myself some good, get some kind of career advance. So I went to Pierce School of Radio and TV in New York City, making use of the GI Bill. While I was at New York, while I was working at Pierce School of Radio and TV, I also worked full-time at the Henry Hudson Hotel. I did the elevator operator bit up through elevator starter. I did some bellhopping. It was a fun job. It was a good place to work. I enjoyed that. I met a lot of nice people. Also, I was in New York. I had to go over to 10th Avenue where the Paulus Fathers had a little place there, and they had these church socials. And I should have known better than to go over there, because met one of these church girls there, my wife Barbara. And before I knew it, why, the old ring was through my nose there, and I was all taken. So we had a long courtship and engagement. It was a great place to do it. We had, even when we were both flat broke, we had plenty to do living in New York City. There was always something to do. We'd go to movies, theater, we'd then have dinner, and the only thing wrong with that whole courtship was having to take her home afterwards. She lived clear out on Long Island, and it took an hour and a half to get her home and then get back to where I got off the train for my own stuff. But I guess she was worth it, so we went through it, and it was complicated, a sort of a long-distance courtship, but at least I could meet her close because she worked near the Henry Hudson at the General Motors building. So I could work over when I had an afternoon shift and catch her as she was coming off work. And that's usually where we'd start our dates, is when I'd meet her after work at the General Motors building. And we had a couple little places, the little Napoli and the Parma, little restaurants that we loved to go to there that we'd head for. Then a lot of times we'd head out to Ciro's on the island that was out at Kew Gardens in Queens. And that was a nice little place. That was our regular hangout, I guess. But we had a lot to do. We'd go swimming up at Jones Beach, Lake Ronkonkoma. There was just so much to do in New York City, and we did a whole lot of it. We could go, even if you were broke, you could go to museums and some dances and other things like that. We went together for about 2 years, and then we were getting pretty serious about that time. And neither one of us wanted to raise a family in New York City. Even then, New York was, of course, well, I won't say it was near as wild as it is now, but it was just not a place that we wanted to raise a family. So we decided that back in Springfield would be a better place to do that. So I came home and was here. So Barb and I went together for about 2 years and became engaged, and I came on home, and after I'd been here a little while to sort of get a job underway, and Barb saved some money in New York, she visited me a few times, flew out here during that time, and met Mom and Dad, who were very much in favor of her and all. And then finally, on April 28th, 1956, why we were married. We've been married for 41 years now. So it evidently worked pretty good. So after the marriage, we went on our honeymoon to Rockton, Illinois, a place called the Wagon Wheel Resort. And it was a pretty upscale place, and we had a very nice time there. And Barb and I got to know each other much better than we had, of course. And she got a little bit worried about how she was going to feed me, having discovered the famous Goulet appetite. But she's always managed to do pretty good, as you can see by looking at me now. So after the little honeymoon at Rockton, why, we took off a few days early and just sort of drove up through Michigan and then up into Canada, and spent a couple of our honeymoon nights up in Canada and then headed south again and back to town and back to work. I was working at Alice Chalmers yet in those days, or I was back at Alice Chalmers again. And so that was our occupation at that time. Later on, as I dropped Alice Chalmers due to layoffs and all, and I became engaged with the Fuller Brush Company and a couple other jobs. But until finally in 1960, I went to the post office. And all this time, of course, Barb had been encouraging me in the Army Reserve. We both decided that I should follow along in the military career there, since I did seem to enjoy it and do well in it. And Grady Hamilton at the Army Reserve asked me about getting commissioned. He pointed out that I had the 6 months in combat as a first 3 grader, and laid the law down and threw the forms on the desk and said, fill them out. And so Grady, being a very forceful type, well, I filled them out. And next thing I knew, I had a commission as a second lieutenant. So I was off and running in that. After 9 years as an enlisted man, though, I got off to a slow start as a second lieutenant. And that possibly influenced my career farther up the line, since I got off to a slow start. But I went up through the grades, through, of course, captain, major, and lieutenant colonel, and went through all the schooling, the career, the basic course at Fort Benning, the career course at Aberdeen, Maryland, just innumerable correspondence courses, and finally ended up at Command and General Staff course at Leavenworth, Kansas, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Barbara was very patient during all this time, and I've always thought that it was a good thing for Barb and I. We had that 2 weeks at least separation every year when I went to summer camp, and even more when there was other schools. And Barb and I always looked at each other with fresher eyes when I came home, and I think it worked out well for us. But of course, it was much harder on her because she was caught with the kids, because we had 4 children along the way. Ellen, who was born April 11th, 1957, Diane, who was born November 26th, 58, Bernard Jr., who was born April 30th, 62, and Matthew, born October 21st, 1965. So, whenever Barb would stay home, why, she, of course, couldn't quite relax, since she always had the 4 kids to take care of. And I can't say that I had that at summer camp. And to me, it's a wonder. It's